how has your practice with archives changed or been affected by the digital turn? Judy.
Thank you. So can I begin by correcting myself? Because I realized as I was listening to the other speakers, my brain was doing that catch-up thing where I was thinking, oh my God, I said Foucault wrote Archive Fever, which clearly it was Derrida, so I would hate any of you to be going away and chasing a text that Foucault did not write. That was brain thinking one thing and mouth saying something totally different. So the digital obviously has been enormously positive for the way archives work with artists in terms of the sheer exposure and accessibility. So we digitize, that means that people all over the world can access material. I absolutely wholeheartedly agree that this digital surrogate is never a replacement for engagement with the real artifact, but people in Australia can look at things in my archive and engage with them at least virtually, so that's got to be a good thing. And in terms of the way that inspires artists or affects visual culture, it means that artists are able to pull images and information from all kinds of places and synthesize those in completely new ways. So that is the good bit of the way the digital has affected archives and the way we interact with artists. But I really do have grave concerns about what it means to be archiving things digitally. And this assumption that if you tweet it, if you Facebook it, that it's there, that it's archived, and that that constitutes your archive. And I actually don't believe that to be so. And I don't believe it's going to be as easy for us to reconstruct an artist's life from Tumblr, from Facebook, from the hard drive which has collapsed, the CD-ROMs that have bit rot. You know, in what I like to call in the museum world, the olden days. In the olden days, it was all tangible. So the art lecturer had an office where he had his course documentation and his degree show catalogues and his photographs of the installation. And when that person left, somebody said, shall we throw this out or shall we keep it? So this body of material that grows organically without too much thought, because it's just something that that person feels they need, at some point becomes the archive. Everything you own is password protected. It can only really be accessed by you. It may continue in some weird intangible way to exist on the internet, but unless somebody can get at that as a body of material that relates to you as an artist, it is gone. And it used to be that the artists had the shoebox under the bed with the birthday cards and the letters and the photographs. And from that, we were able to piece together their life, their story, their practice. Even if everybody's story isn't interesting, at least the stories were kind of there. But I don't think for a whole generation of artists that is happening now. There's kind of a big gap between how quickly digital technology is moving forward and how little we've thought about how we go about archiving and gathering that information and making it safe and keeping it safe. So in 100 years' time, it's still in a format that somebody who wants to know about you and your artistic practice in 2013 can access it. And we're doing quite a lot of thinking around that. And I've been talking to the Archiving the Arts people at the National Archive about how do we create a standard, how do we communicate to young artists that there's got to be a way for you to be saving your key emails, your key photographs. So not everything, we don't want, sorry James, but we the archivists, I don't want 4,000 random photographs with no metadata and I can't work out why or when or what. We need the edit, Ruth, we need the edit. And I don't think in a digital world that people are doing that because they don't have to, because they have the hard drive space.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just on that and anecdotally, I mean, it's interesting that, I don't know, back in October, the last film, I mean, Fuji is the last major film manufacturer, withdrew from film production and material film production. With two exceptions, the thing that they're still going to produce is archive film, and the reason they're producing archive film still, and they still think it's worth investing in that, is because the archive future of digital material is so uncertain. And so that the stuff that's seen to be of value will be transferred to film, moving image material. So it's, and working back from that, I mean, it's not so long ago that the BBC back in the early 80s sort of took this decision that they had this huge archive of material film which they transferred to videotape. I mean, I think you would have thought they'd have someone who would have a GCSE, at least in physics, available to know that the Earth has a magnetic field, so that most of that archive is mush now, and it's no longer available. So it was a sort of self-destructive archive that, and the BBC has since been trying to buy back copies of its old programs and things from around the world for people who happen to record it on VHS, and it's still just about playable. So there's a kind of hubris about new media that, and I think that I agree with Lindsay on this. It's like this whole idea that that somehow this undifferentiated kind of mass of images that everybody generates. I mean, it's like when you're, I mean, just to think when, I mean, I think the last major city was Rome, where it was actually packed with tourists, and you think, well, how many people have stood here and taken exactly that same photograph, and how many of them will actually kind of survive? Because it only survives if it's in a collection that's kind of available. And most people's, the investment you have to make. I love the idea that it's easy to actually retain a digital archive, because every year or two you're faced with the conundrum. Well, you have to buy, if you're serious about preserving your stuff, you have to buy, a really decent external drive that you transfer all of your material onto. You're going up this gradient of transfer, and that has the modern connection, so it'll work with the next computer. That this, after 3 years, your laptop's worthless. You have to get a new one, and all of these sorts of things. So if you're serious about archiving digitally, it's more obsessive. It requires more work than it's ever done before.
Much more proactive.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen
You have to
organically
really-
and naturally. You have to actually go out there and capture the stuff that's important.
And organise it,
Self-consciously.
as you say, in a way that it's available, that it's catalogued in some sort of way that you can find it.
So, I mean, I'd like to touch on that actually, because that's kind of the fundamental principle of what we do, which is, of course, as I think everybody here can agree, images that are floating around are, without, as you say, metadata, completely useless. So the only thing that is useful in an archive is actually being able to find things, and that edit, which is in fact, I think you can argue, in fact, also sometimes a rewriting of history, as the artist who wanted to take something off of the website did. It is an edit. It is a chosen history that you tell, and people even do this, of course, in broad terms on Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, etc. In terms of telling a story of what their life is to people, which in fact has nothing to do with what they really do day to day. But I think to focus on art in particular, that's exactly why I would say that you can't have an archive of let's say, a Facebook page, because this information is not organized, and that's why we created ArtStack, really, is because we wanted an easy way for people to organize the art that either they produced or they liked. So all of those 300,000 artworks that are on the site, those are all unique records. If there's a duplicate record, the system automatically recognizes that that work is already on the site, and it's added as a secondary image or a tertiary image, et cetera, onto the same record. So each work is in fact a unique work. The information, the metadata that's added is all unique. It's wiki, of course, but people go through and check the information, and if they know it, they add it. So what we do is effectively create that kind of online, accessible anywhere. You can see it on your phone, see it on your iPad. You switch computers, it's not a problem. You're at your friend's house, you want to show them something you did or something you liked, you can log in, and you can find that work again because it's on your artist page, it's on your profile page, it's in the page for French artists or work from 1973. So it's that system, which I do think actually is incredibly important for digital archiving, and exactly the reason why things like Facebook and Twitter are in fact really hopeless as a digital.
I wanted to say something about how the digital has affected the actual making of work, of the making of my work, because the question is, how has your practice with archives changed or been affected by the digital turn? So as well as the edit, I think it has an effect on the form, not to sort of separate form and content, obviously, because they're completely connected, and if you think of a poem, for example, but it's also that the idea of the digital space or different kinds of digital space inform how I have made works. I've made works specifically that relate only to a digital space, or that are for a digital space, or that create some kind of a relationship between a real space and a digital space. And so there's that, and in a sense, the kind of proliferation of digital spaces has, or if you like, the spreading of one digital space. Though I would say it is, in a sense, the proliferating of digital spaces, because there are very different digital spaces within the internet. Has also, in a sense, heightened my need and desire and awareness of the need to work in spaces that aren't, in physical, three-dimensional, geographical sites. And actually at Centre St. Martin's, or Byam Shore as it was, I did a project which called the Polytechnical Institute for the Study of the Expanding Field of Radical Urban Life, otherwise known as Archway Polytechnic. And if you do archwaypolytechnic.org, it comes up. And the last project for that, the last project to date, probably the last project, was called Hide, and it was a 12-hour live performance that was in Archway, overlooking, it was in an urban hide, it was overlooking the entrance to the tube station, and it was broadcast on the internet live. So what you saw was the film out the window, you saw what the camera saw out the window, and you heard me talking to various guests. 7 different people came in over the period, the 12 hours, talking. So it's like a 12-hour film with these voiceovers, this commentary. There was nothing to see in Archway. All the other projects of the Archway Polytechnic had only taken place in Archway, so you had to go to Archway to see them. They weren't broadcast on the internet. This one was happening in Archway, but you could only see it on the internet. But it was only broadcast live. It wasn't archived. And then with that material, I edited it. I transcribed all the text, and we edited it with Anna Hart, who's the director of AIR. I mean, she may call herself director, but she is the director of AIR, into a book. So it was very, very heavily edited into a book that would work as a book that you might want to read. So, you know, from 12 hours to a book that you could read. Like
Is there also an online version of the book?
No, there isn't an online version. That was
Why
part
not?
of the point. Was that it's about this kind of what happens when you know, it's very much thinking about these different spaces, the space of the internet, the space of the live performance, the space of the book, and what you might do with it, and where you might take that book afterwards.
As well, context of reception, I suppose.
Yeah,
within
exactly.
The work and how the work
Yeah.
can change within the context you presented.
And one of the funny things is that some people who heard about it, who were on the mailing list of Archway Polytechnic, came to Archway and were trying to find it. And then they'd see the camera and they'd be waving at it. So of course they were in it, but it's kind of strange sort of thing would happen. So I just use that example as just as an example of how the digital has affected the form as well as, you know, distribution. That distribution as part of that form, if you like, of the art form, and reception, obviously, and distribution in a more traditional sense, perhaps as well.
I got it. Yeah. If I can just quickly add a couple of things. So from my personal point of view, clearly the digital turn hasn't changed the archive, has added something to it. It's a new tool that can be used. Like archiving physically doesn't mean you don't have to archive digitally or vice versa. They coexist. It's not one means the real object doesn't exist and the artist trashes in the bin as soon as he finishes because he has documentation pictures anyway. So that's quite interesting, and you can find new possibility of dealing with it in terms of network. I use the internet as an archive for research every day of my life, and I use other people's suggestion and other people's link to drift through the internet for my curatorial research. But at the same time, I think that the internet as an archive has also kind of like, and it gets back to the point of editing, has given power to the artist, because the artist for the first time as an individual is able to showcase to the world his own work and editing quite strictly what he wants to present, in which way, to which context. So his own website, which we're not talking about Facebook or Tumblr or Twitter, becomes a place and he knows his audience and he decides how to edit. And there is a certain sort of aesthetic that is very conscious about it. And it kind of like has changed a lot as well, how artists now are making physical work because they respond to a certain sort of digital aesthetic. So there's a dialogue between these two places, but I would never think that one could replace the other, because we need both. And as we were talking before, like the really quickly changing of medias makes works strongly fragile and ephemeral. So we need to preserve that, and we need to like constantly update a certain sort of like, and transfer files or like ways of reading these files through history and towards the future. Otherwise we kind of like risk that lots of things gonna get lost.